2007, Nokia sold more phones than every other company on Earth combined. Not smartphones, not a specific category, all phones. Nokia's global market share was over 40%. 1 out of every 2.5 mobile phones sold anywhere in the world was a Nokia. The company had survived world wars, the Great Depression, and its own near bankruptcy in the 1990s to become the most recognizable technology brand on the planet. In developing markets across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the word Nokia was synonymous with the word phone. 8 years later, Nokia's phone business was sold to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. Microsoft wrote off the entire acquisition within 18 months and laid off the majority of the employees it had just acquired. Nokia had gone from the most dominant consumer electronics company in the world to a cautionary tale in less than a decade. This is not a simple story about missing the smartphone revolution. Nokia had smartphones before Apple did. Their engineers saw the future clearly. Their research labs produced technology that was years ahead of what Apple shipped in 2007. The failure of Nokia was not a failure of vision or technology. It was a failure of courage. And it came from the top. Nokia was founded in 1865 in Tampere, Finland, as a paper mill. Over the following century, it evolved through rubber manufacturing, cable production, and consumer electronics, before arriving, almost accidentally, in the mobile phone business in the 1980s. The mobile pivot proved to be the most consequential decision in the company's history. Nokia threw itself into mobile telecommunications with a focus and discipline that left every competitor behind. By the mid-1990s, Nokia phones were setting the standard for design, reliability, and user experience in a category that most companies were still treating as a peripheral business. The Nokia 3310, launched in 2000, became one of the best-selling consumer electronics products in history. Its durability was legendary. Stories of Nokia phones surviving falls, floods, and conditions that would destroy any other device became a cultural phenomenon. The phone was indestructible. The snake game was addictive. The battery lasted a week. By 2003, Nokia's research division was already working on touchscreen interfaces, mobile internet browsers, and application ecosystems. Internal prototypes existed that resembled, in many respects, what Apple would ship as the iPhone 4 years later. Nokia was not asleep. They were ahead. What they could not do was turn what they saw in January 2007. Nokia's internal reaction was not panic. It was, by multiple accounts of people who were in those meetings, dismissal. The iPhone had no physical keyboard, a deal breaker, Nokia's leadership believed, for serious users. It ran on a slow edge network. It could not send MMS messages at launch. It had no copy and paste. The battery life was poor compared to Nokia's devices. It was available only in the United States, only on AT&T. By every metric Nokia used to evaluate phones, the iPhone was inferior. And by those metrics, they were correct. What Nokia could not see, or would not see, was that Apple was not competing on Nokia's metrics. Apple had defined an entirely new set of metrics. The question was not whether the iPhone had a better keyboard. The question was whether a device that felt magical to use, that put the internet in your pocket in a genuinely usable form, that had an app store that could become an entire ecosystem, whether that device would make Nokia's metrics irrelevant. It did, within 3 years. But the more important failure was not the strategic misread of the iPhone. It was what happened inside Nokia when people tried to respond to it. Nokia's operating system was called Symbian. It had been designed for feature phones, devices with physical keyboards, limited screens, and constrained processing power. Adapting Symbian to compete with iOS was like trying to turn a cargo ship into a sports car. The engineers knew it. The product managers knew it. Middle management knew it. What they could not do was say it to the people at the top. Nokia had developed a culture over years of dominance in which bad news did not travel upward. Executives were feared. Performance pressure was extreme. Managers who told senior leadership that Symbian could not compete with iOS risked their careers. So they did not tell them. Instead, they reported that progress was being made, that the next version of Symbian would close the gap, that the touchscreen initiative was on track, that the app ecosystem was growing. None of it was true in any meaningful sense, but the culture made honesty dangerous and optimism safe. This dynamic, which researchers who studied Nokia's collapse later called the fear factor, meant that the people with the most accurate picture of Nokia's competitive situation were unable to communicate it to the people with the power to act on it. While Nokia's middle management was telling leadership what they wanted to hear, Android was being developed. Google had acquired Android in 2005 and was building a mobile operating system designed specifically to compete with iOS and to be given away free to any manufacturer who wanted to use it. Nokia had been approached about Android. They declined. They were building their own platform. The platform they were building was called MeeGo. It was, by many accounts, genuinely impressive. The MeeGo device that was eventually released, the Nokia N9 in 2011, received extraordinary reviews. Tech journalists called it the best smartphone Nokia had ever made. Users loved it. Nokia discontinuing MeeGo was made by a man who had been CEO of Nokia for less than 2 months. Stephen Elob joined Nokia as CEO in September 2010, the first non-Finnish CEO in the company's history. He came from Microsoft, where he had run the Office division. In February 2011, Elob sent an internal memo to Nokia employees that became one of the most famous documents in technology history. He described Nokia as standing on a burning platform, a reference to an oil rig disaster in which workers had to choose between staying on a burning platform or jumping into the freezing North Sea. The memo was honest in a way that Nokia's internal culture had not been for years. Elob acknowledged that Nokia was losing, that Symbian was not competitive, that the company needed to act decisively. What he decided to do was partner with Microsoft. Nokia would abandon Symbian, abandon MeeGo, and build its smartphones on Windows Phone, Microsoft's mobile operating system, which had a tiny market share and a minimal app ecosystem. The announcement was catastrophic for Nokia's competitive position in the short term. Customers who had been considering Nokia's Symbian devices immediately stopped buying them. Why would you buy a phone on a platform that was being abandoned? The Osborne effect, the phenomenon where announcing a future product kills sales of the current one, hit Nokia with full force. Symbian sales collapsed. Windows Phone devices took years to develop. In the gap between the announcement and the first Windows Phone Nokia, millions of customers chose Android or iOS and never came back. The Windows Phone partnership failed to gain traction. Developers did not build for Windows Phone. consumers did not buy Windows Phone devices in meaningful numbers. The market share that Nokia was supposed to rebuild never materialized. In September 2013, Microsoft announced it would acquire Nokia's Devices and Services division for $7.2 billion. Elop returned to Microsoft as part of the deal. Within 18 months, Microsoft had written down the entire acquisition value, laid off the majority of the Nokia employees it had acquired, over 25,000 people, and effectively ended Nokia's century-long run as a phone manufacturer. The brand was eventually licensed to other manufacturers. Nokia phones exist today as licensed products built by companies that have no connection to the original Nokia engineering teams that built the devices that once sold 40% of the world's mobile phones. So what actually killed Nokia? The technology failure was real but fixable. Nokia had the engineers, the capital, and the time to build a competitive smartphone platform. MeeGo proved that the capability existed. The strategic failure, choosing Windows Phone over Android, abandoning MeeGo at the moment it was finally ready, was severe, but perhaps survivable with different execution. What was not survivable was the cultural failure. A company in which accurate information cannot travel from the people who have it to the people who need it is a company that cannot respond to threats it cannot see clearly. Nokia's middle management had known for years that Symbian could not compete with what was coming. That knowledge never reached the decisions it needed to change. When Elop arrived and forced honesty into the system, the honest answer that Nokia was in a desperate situation led to desperate decisions. The Windows Phone bet was a Hail Mary from a team that had not understood how far behind it had fallen until it was too late to run a more disciplined play. Nokia survived as a company. It exists today as a telecommunications infrastructure business, selling the equipment that powers the mobile networks that other people's phones run on. It is a legitimate, profitable company. It is not a phone company anymore. The Nokia 3310 is still celebrated online as the most durable phone ever made. It can survive anything. The company that made it could not survive the culture it built when it was winning. 40% of the world's phones, then 0, in 8 years. The platform was burning. They just waited too long to jump.